Right to be Read podcast, episode number 148, interview with Tim Knox.
You are listening to the Right to be Read podcast, and this is your host, Ani Alexander.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Right to be Read podcast. It's me, Ani Alexander, and as always I'm trying to encourage and inspire you with this podcast. Before we start today, I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone who has filled out the survey, the short survey that I've sent to my email list. I truly appreciate your feedback and your time. It brought me loads of new ideas, it gave me insight, and it had very surprising information there. So thank you very much. For those of you, and there were few people there who filled out the survey who love the way I say books. I'm sure in this interview we have several times that I mentioned the word books with my Wiki accent. So that will be for you especially. I hope you like it. Well, thank you very much for filling that out. I'll tell you exactly what I have in mind. I have few new things coming out soon, and not only about the podcast, but also about coaching, online courses, and loads of other stuff. So I've been pretty busy these days, and I'm sure that you will like what will be coming out soon. Meanwhile, before all that is ready, I'm having yet another interview, and today I'm talking to Tim Knox. And who is Tim? Here is a short bio before we jump into the interview itself. So he is a sought-after corporate speaker and comedian. He is published author, talk radio host, syndicated business columnist, and self-professed mama's boy. His unique perspective is enjoyed by the thousands who listen to his radio show, read his books and columns, and hear him speak every year. So he's the host of the podcast which is called Interviewing Authors, and you should check that out. It will be of interest to you as well. And today with him we will be discussing about building author's brand, the business aspect of being writer, and the difference between traditional and self-publishing, how to market books, and maybe in some sense, this episode will not be so inspiring, but then once in a while, we really need the down-to-earth approach and to face the reality and to tell things as they are. So this episode is about that. Enjoy. Hello there, team. It's really nice to have you over, and welcome to the Right to be Read podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. I am a big fan.
Thank you. It's actually you're from the few guests whom I approached and who said, "Oh, but I'm already listening to your podcast." So, things are happening.
Yeah, well, they are. You and I kind of play in the same backyard. So you are someone that I am aware of and I listen to. I do another podcast where I interview best-selling authors. So you and I are kind of playing in the same sandbox, as we say. So I was very aware of you.
Oh, exactly. Most probably we've shared some guests too, I guess.
I could have, yeah. Most of my guests have been like New York Times best-selling authors. I haven't done a lot of online marketers or anything like that, but I'm sure we've crossed some bridges at some time.
Oh, definitely. So let's sort of, I know that you started as an entrepreneur. Was it, did you have a normal, stable job before that, or you started straight away being an entrepreneur?
I guess it's what you consider a normal, stable job.
Like the corporate
yeah,
nightmare?
I was in corporate America for about 5 years, and actually working as a graphic artist. This was back years ago, before all these computers came along and everything was done, pen and ink rendering and that sort of thing. And because of what I learned in that job, I started my first business, which was a graphic design company. And did very well with that. And eventually the internet came along and we morphed into a website design company. And then we started doing e-commerce software and built that company up and stayed with it for about 15 years. Retired from that, and then I went into the retail business. I actually had a chain of retail gun stores at one time, and
Wow.
yeah, that was way more work than I wanted to do. So eventually retired from that. But I've always been a writer. I've written books. I've written small business columns. So I've always been very interested in digital media. But yeah, I basically went from corporate to business, and now I'm dabbling in social media and writing and that sort of thing.
So when you say you've always been a writer, do you remember the very first thing you wrote, like how it started?
You know what? I was writing my own books when I was a kid, and I come from a really poor family. We really couldn't afford anything extra. I used to draw my own comic books. I would write my own fairy tales. My mother still has them in a box somewhere.
Wow.
And so that was like the first writing I did. The first serious writing I did was in the early 2000s. I was approached by Entrepreneur Magazine to be their online business expert, and so I wrote a monthly column for the magazine as well as the website, and that got me into doing a regular weekly small business advice column for my own local paper, which was eventually syndicated to about 7 papers. And so that's what got me started writing. And then I wrote a small business book in '07 that was published by John Wiley and did really well. And so that's really what launched my formal writing career. I've written a couple of novels as well. So I write a lot of short stories. So I'm just kind of the creative type, and writing is just one of my outlets.
Okay, I see. So, since you have written both fiction and nonfiction, it's very different. So, if you compare them in the sense of, your experiences while writing, and maybe if one can say which one is harder, I guess, if it's possible to compare those two.
Well, they're really very different. I must confess, I enjoy writing fiction, crime fiction particularly, more than I like writing business books. I guess because I wrote that column for almost 6 years, so I had 300 columns. So I really burned out on offering, small business advice. And when you look at the market, there's so many business books on the market now, it really doesn't interest me. I'm really more interested in fiction, but they are two very different things. If you're a business writer or a motivational writer, typically you're a subject matter expert if you're writing it yourself, if you're not farming it out. And so you're really writing almost what I call a light textbook. It's kind of a how-to. And so if you know that really well, it's relatively easy to do. I could sit down right now and write a 300-page small business book just, based on knowledge.
Well, 300 pages is not small.
Yeah. Well, again, it's the body of knowledge. But, if you're writing a fiction book, it's imagination. And I enjoy that so much more because when I sit down and map out a nonfiction book, I know pretty much where I'm going. When I start writing fiction, I go where the story takes me. And to me, that's just a lot more fun. I really enjoy writing the fiction.
Yeah, I can tell that. The same is for me actually, because it's a completely different experience. And yeah, you enjoy the ride actually. Yeah,
it is, and it's a completely different audience and a completely different market. So
it is.
you do everything differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as I understood, your first book was a nonfiction, which was published traditionally. Is that right?
It was. It was published in '07, I think, by John Wiley. It was actually a kind of a culmination of everything that I had learned writing the small business column. I'm kind of a comedian. I've done a lot of comedy in my time, so when I write, it has a comedic slant to it, and so it was a comedic small business book. It was called Everything I Know About Business I Learned from My Mama. And because I'm a Southern boy, I'm a mama's boy. But yeah, I went the traditional route with that. I found an agent very quickly who sold it to John Wiley very quickly. I got a nice mid 5-figure advance and, sent the book in, and they basically did, everything. My subsequent books, my novels, my fiction have been self-published because it's much harder to get someone interested in fiction than it is nonfiction when it comes to traditional publishing. For example, John Wiley and Sons is the largest, at least they were then, largest publisher of nonfiction books in the world. And if you had a platform or you had a following, it's relatively easy to get John Wiley to publish a book. But if you are just writing romance or mysteries or something like that, it's much, much more difficult to go the traditional route because, you have to get an agent because publishers typically won't take your work unless it is agented. And these agents have so many people trying to get them to represent them. Your chances of getting an agent are really very slim. And then the chances of that agent actually selling your book is slim still. So I know writers who got an agent the first week and still never sold the book.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so it's a really tough business. And the thing about self-publishing, I'm a big fan of self-publishing. The nice thing about self-publishing is it's made it easy for anyone to publish a book. The bad thing is it's made it easy for anyone to publish a book because now the water is so crowded. It's just much more difficult to do.
Exactly. But let's go back to the traditional publishing. When you said that you managed to do that relatively quickly, I know that everything is quite slow there. So even relatively quickly compared to self-publishing should be quite slow. So what time frame are we talking about?
Well, what I did, and I always enjoy telling this story because it makes me sound much smarter than I am.
Okay.
I'm a marketer. That's one of the things when you're an entrepreneur, as long as I was, you learn to market. And so when I decided that I was going to write this book, I knew that I had to have an agent. And so I started researching agents online. And then I found that there was an agent convention being held in Orlando, Florida in like a month from then. And so I thought, okay, this is where a lot of these agents are going to be. How do I get noticed? And so what I did was I ordered... they're called business card CDs, and this was a number of years ago, but basically it was a CD in the shape of a business card. It was a little rectangular CD, and so I put my book on there, I put a collection of my columns, I put a funny label on it, that sort of thing. And so when I went to the convention, rather than walking up to an agent and shoving a book in their face, which is what everybody else was doing, I simply walked up. First I identified 3 agents that I wanted to work with. And I went up to each one of them and I said, hey, my name is Tim Knox. I'm an author. I've written a small business advice book. I don't expect you to read it right now, but if you will take my CD card, it's on there. Maybe you can pop it in your computer and read it on the plane or something. Mm-hmm. And because this little CD card was so unusual, every one of those agents went, wow, what is this? And I'm like, well, it's a CD. It's shaped like a business card. You pop that in your computer. My manuscript is there, blah, blah, blah. And so this was on a Saturday. I got a phone call in my office on Monday afternoon. It was one of the agents that I had approached, and he said, hey, I didn't have anything to do on the way home, so I put your CD in my computer, and I read your book, and I really think I can sell this for you. I want to be your agent. So I literally got an agent in 2 days. He then approached 3 different publishers. 2 of them, John Wiley and one other, put in bids on the book, and he sold the book within 2 weeks. So, it was just all of the planets lined up correctly. It really wasn't the fact that, I was any kind of amazing author. It was just I was an amazing marketer. And so I had planned this out. I figured out, okay, where are these agents going to be? How can I approach them? How can I stand out? And it worked out beautifully. So, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something very important, and that is to stand out. And obviously you did something which is quite disruptive and different, and it kind of, it was memorable. Mm-hmm. So these days, as you said, since self-publishing is so easy to get into, and since we have these amazing stories of people who self-published their book and then, they had a full-time income from their books, royalties and stuff like that, many people are attracted to it, and they think that, if they only write a book and put it out there, everything is going to work amazingly well.
Right.
So, and just because there are many people out there and they have tried very different things and it's very crowded, what do you think can be, is it easy? Do you have any original disruptive ideas of things that could actually get your book noticed?
Well, that's a really good question, and I am a firm believer in doing your homework ahead of time. One of the mistakes that whether you're writing the book yourself or you are just publishing it, meaning you're getting it ghostwritten, so many authors/publishers will just dive in to a market without really taking the time to even see what that market is about. The big fad now is everyone wants to publish fiction, romance, and shifter books and this sort of thing because they see a couple of people online who are having great success, and it's always the me too.
Yep.
Meaning if they can do that, so can I. So they will jump in, they'll produce not wonderful books, they'll get them published, and then they don't do anything. And the thing that they don't understand is the quality of writing, especially if you are doing just digital ghostwritten publishing, quality has very little to do with it. Mm-hmm. It really is more about the ability to produce a high mass number of books and then market those books into an eager audience. For example, if I'm thinking about publishing a book, a romance book about a werewolf, I'm going to get on Amazon and I'm going to research those categories, and I'm going to see, number one, what books are there, number two, who are writing those books, and it really doesn't matter if they're ghostwritten or not, because what I'm doing is I want to see what kind of branding they have and what kind of marketing. And, I'm going to thoroughly research that niche before I have the first word written. Well, then once I do have the book produced, I have to market that book. Chances are if I just throw it up there and put it on a free promo for 5 days, I might see a little spike, but then it goes away.
Yeah.
And, too many authors and publishers don't worry about building the brand. And the brand is what sells. If you look at the best-selling romance books on Amazon, they are romance books from people who have built a very strong brand and a very strong following, and they've got 300 or 400 reviews per book, and they're not worried about keyword strategies or any of the stuff that we worry about, because they built a brand and they built a following. Mm-hmm. And so it really is it's a vital step. If you're going to jump into that market, you need to research that market, and keep in mind the marketing is more important than the writing in this case. Now, if you're an author yourself and you're writing the work yourself, then the writing is important, because what you want to do is you want to build your brand and your following. But if you're just, digitally publishing romance books, a dozen a week, the quality is not nearly the concern of the marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. So, you actually brought up something that is of, we usually talk about this a lot among writers, and many argue that these days it's become more business than a craft. Mm-hmm. Especially fiction writers are arguing about this, because as we spoke about it earlier, writing fiction is a completely different experience, and they sort of, most of the fiction writers are not exactly business driven and have this marketing knowledge and approach to the things. Mm-hmm. So there is this problem between writing what is commercially justified,
right,
versus writing something that they are passionate about or they feel like writing. So how do you find this balance between the two? Because sometimes they contradict each other.
Well, they do. And you know what? On my podcast, I do a podcast called Interviewing Authors. We talked about it earlier. And, I talk to New York Times bestsellers. I mean, these are authors who sell 20 million books, and they are all complaining about the business side of things. It's back in the good old days. If you were a really wonderful writer, you could write a book, you could find an agent, you could find a publisher, they would take it, and all you had to worry about was writing. Now, I don't care, whether you are just starting out or you are someone who sold 20 million books, you have to be concerned with the business side of it, and that is the marketing. Even the big authors now are having to do things themselves. So, if you're a writer who can look me in the eye and say, hey, I write because I'm passionate about writing, I don't do it for the money, well, then great. Go write your book and don't worry whether or not it sells.
Yeah.
Because, but if you can look at me in the eye and go, I'm a great writer, but I also want to get rich doing it, well, then you've got to be a business person.
Yeah.
You've got to be, the book is your product. And so you've got to be the entrepreneur, the marketer, the PR person, the social media person. And sure, you can find, help doing this. You can find people to do this for you, but you still have to manage it. And so I hear that complaint all the time. I just want to write. I don't want to market. I don't want to social media. Well, that's fine. Well, go write, but then don't bitch if it doesn't sell anything.
Exactly.
So
it won't, most probably, if you don't do anything else.
Well, no, it won't. It really won't. And that's the sad point. If the great writers in history had to market their own work, chances are we never would have heard of any of them. So, the Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series, and I'm misquoting here, but he said something like, I'm not the greatest writer in the world, but I am the greatest marketer.
Yeah.
And so, what it comes down to is what are you passionate about? If you're passionate about the craft and about writing and just writing the absolute best story you can write, whether or not anyone reads it, you're a true writer, but you're also going to probably be a poor writer. There's an old saying, if passion was money, every poet would be rich.
Yeah, exactly.
And that I don't know a rich poet. I don't. But, it really comes down to, what your passion is. For example, me, if you ask me, Tim, if you had your choice, what would you do if money wasn't a concern? I would write. I would write my little ghost stories and my police stories, and I wouldn't worry about it. But the thing about it is, those don't make the money required to finance everything that I do. I've got 9 dogs. They want to eat. So I need money. So, what I do is everything that I do in business, I do to finance the passion that I do, whether or not I make money. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All of the digital publishing and the videos and the interviews, all of that is done to make money to finance the fun things that I like to do.
Yeah. Agree. That's how most of us are doing. So actually, you spoke about marketing, which makes me think that, I always say this, and my listeners are familiar with this term, but I always say that authors are personal brands. And most probably, instead of just marketing your book, you should market your personal brand as an author, your author brand.
Right.
So you mentioned that you can get help from other people who are doing this very well. So you can, you either have to spend your own time or you can hire people. But since it's about personal branding, how much you can rely on others, it's still, you do need to do the things yourself, at least part of them, right?
Oh, I agree. When you're a writer, take Stephen King. Stephen King has written, I don't know, 100 and some odd books now. Well, how many Stephen King books can the average person name? Well, typically it's, The Shining, Carrie. It's the books that have been made into movies that people can name. So, Stephen King has become a brand that overshadows his book. And you can always tell when this happens because if you look at the cover of the book, if the author's name is bigger than the title of the book, that author has become a brand. And you can rest assured that that author has worked his or her butt off to get there. Now, I'm sure they have PR people, they have virtual assistants, they have social media people. When I was doing the interviewing authors program, I always dealt with a PR person. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was the person who was doing the outreach and doing the grunt work, but the author always had to come on the program and be the brand. Mm-hmm. So, you're 100% correct. You can find people to do the little, the technical clerical things, but when it comes time to promote yourself and your books, if you're an author, you've got to be a brand, and that's why people buy your books. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's be honest. There are authors out there who, over the course of their career, their books have not really gotten better. They've gotten worse. But because they have built up such an audience, their readers will buy every book that they sell, and they're very loyal. And that's because they've built up that brand. They've become the brand because they've surpassed their book. Yeah. And that's the goal for all of us. It's really hard to get there, but it takes work. But yeah, the days of just sitting by and writing the book and then passing everything off to everyone else, those days are gone. Most authors are now, they're out there on the stump. They are speaking. They're doing book signings. They're doing podcasts. Why David Baldacci is one of the best-selling authors of all time who was on my show. Why would David Baldacci, who sold, 50 million books, get on a podcast with a guy in Alabama? Because David Baldacci or his people know that he has to continue promoting his brand and his books to keep it going. So you and I do a big service, Ani. They should pay us to be on our shows.
Yeah, and then we will finance our passion and write.
There you go. Then we'll go write a book.
Okay, so in that case, let's just get to the biggest pain point that these author brands are facing, especially in the very beginning. It's the visibility and their own name, which is not recognized by anyone. So when you mentioned like free promotions, I don't think they work that well anymore, because these days, if it's just yet another book by an unknown author whom you don't know and no one spoke about, most probably you won't even want to have it for free. Right. So how are people overcome, because in the very beginning everyone is in the same situation, right? Everyone is unknown, everyone is not visible, it's a crowded place, it's a noisy place, you have to stand out somehow. So what are like the first steps? How do you end up kind of climbing a bit higher in order to gain that minimum sort of minimum recognizability, or whatever you can call that, visibility in your sphere, so people would be interested eventually trying out your books?
Yeah, well, they say the hardest thing to do in a crowd is to get noticed. Yeah, and that's completely true. If you write a book, number one, if you're going to market that book and brand that book has to be the absolute best book it can be. Meaning that before you give it away or try to sell it, you have done thorough rewrites, you have done thorough edits. I can't tell you how many horrific books I see that are full of typos. Oh my God, it's terrible. So before you do anything, you have to make sure that book is the absolute best book it can be. And that means have other people look at it, preferably other people who know what they're doing. I have had people tell me, oh, my book is great. And I say, well, how do you know? Well, because my wife told me. Or, and I'm like, well, that, God love her. That's really not a, So make sure you are producing the absolute best book you can be, or you can do. The next steps in self-publishing, of course, it's very easy to put it on Kindle, to put it on CreateSpace. You need to get a cover design. And I cannot tell you how vital it is that you have a great cover. Yes. Because that's how, especially on Amazon and Kindle, that's how people will notice your book. If you go to Amazon right now, and the thing you have to understand is Amazon's just a search engine. People don't go browse Amazon. They type what they're looking for in the search bar and it comes up. So if I am your potential reader, let's say you have written a romance and I'm a reader of romance. I go to Amazon, I type in romance in the search bar. There are tens of thousands of books, and Amazon is going to show me the ones that they have deemed to be the top of the line. Well, because I'm a visual person, my eye is going to go to the best cover. So not only does your book have to be amazing, your cover has to be eye-catching. It has to be very appealing, because 9 times out of 9, that's what is going to attract a reader. So you've got to make sure your cover's good. So the publishing part is easy. Now, to your question, how do you start marketing that? Well, it's good old-fashioned hitting the ground online. You need to identify Facebook groups, Twitter groups, even Instagram, any social media group that has anything to do with people who read the kind of book you have produced. You need to look for websites and blogs, because what you're wanting is someone to read it and give you a positive review. Because typically after someone looks at your cover, they'll look and see, okay, does it have any reviews? How many stars does it have? The more reviews you have, the easier it is to sell. So, you're going to have to just do your homework, find blogs, find readers, give them free copies of your book, either paperback or digitally. Ask them to read it. Ask them to leave you a review. It's kind of funny. I had an author the other day ask me if I would read and review his book. And I said, well, I don't normally do that. It takes a lot of time. But if you want to send me a copy, I'll certainly look at it. And he said, well, you can buy them on Amazon.
Okay.
Okay, and I said, okay, here's your review, So you've got to work hard to get those reviews, because, again, that's one thing that helps you build that brand. Don't worry about making money. You're going to give away a lot of books to try to get those reviews and get that brand going. And, one of the things that I have learned, and I learned this from a guy named Hugh Howey. Do you know who Hugh is?
Wool.
Okay.
Yeah.
I talked to Hugh. He's a friend. I interviewed him on the show, and I asked him, I said, when you started out, what was your plan? What was your strategic plan? And Hugh said, my plan was to write 8 books or 10 books in 5 years. And all I was going to do is focus on the books. I wasn't going to worry about the marketing or anything. I was just going to write. And the reason he did that was, in his mind, he knew that one of those books would take off, or he would get noticed, and he wanted to have a backlist, meaning more than one book. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened. By the time, Wool, the book that really put him on the map, by the time that was even noticed, Hugh had been writing for several years, and he had, 7 or 8 books. So the reader went and read Wool and went, wow, I wonder what else this guy has.
Oh, yeah.
And so his entire catalog started selling. So he didn't try to do any marketing at all up until that point. And, it's hard for me to write a book and not scream about it or market it. But I have to tell you, I think his thinking is solid, because if he had just had that one book and then nothing else, I don't think he would be where he is today, which is multimillionaire status. So, it's just like everything else. You've got to do everything you possibly can to get that book noticed. And don't just do it online. Do it in your hometown. Go to every bookstore in town and ask them if they will carry your book. Ask them if you can do a book signing. Get on Facebook. Try to promote your brand there. You need to set up a page for your book. I'm a big fan of having a blog or having a website. You want people to go and find your work and more about you. And really, Ani, that's where most authors stop, is because they either don't know how to market, or they don't have the energy or the desire to market, and they just let it go. Mm-hmm. And I have had so many authors tell me, well, I don't really do social media. And I say, well, how many books are you? Well, no, I don't sell many books. Well, maybe that's why. So yeah, social media is a big part of it, but so are our boots on the ground, in your hometown, trying to build a brand there. And it's a lot of hard work, and it may take you a while. It may be, you might be 7 or 8 books in before anyone goes, wow, who is this person?
And writers are so impatient. So
we are. We're artists. It's just, and I'm no different. I am no different. I mean, right now, I'm shopping 2 novels around to agents, and I'm like, why don't they realize how brilliant I am? You know what I mean? Why aren't these people beating down my door? So it's just the way we are.
Let's talk about this. Let's
Sure.
talk about why actually you are looking for agents, and why do you prefer the traditional way of publishing your books in that
Well,
case?
you know, there are a couple of reasons, and primarily it's distribution and probably a little bit of ego. You know, when you do go the traditional route, there is some support from the publisher. There's not a lot. They're not going to, unless you're a number one author, you know, they're not going to really spend a lot of marketing dollars on you. But the one thing they do is they will distribute your book to bookstores and libraries. And so it's more or less a distribution point. You know, what I want to do is have a traditional publisher, you know, distribute the books and then let me keep all of the online stuff.
Okay,
And
I see.
you know what I mean? Yeah. And that's what a lot of authors are doing now. This is what Hugh Howey did, you know, when he was approached by whatever huge publishing house that he went with, you know, he retained his online rights. But I think there's just, there's some bragging rights there. There's some ego, but in my case, it's primarily distribution. You know, when I wrote my small business book, I remember walking through the Atlanta airport and seeing it in the window of a bookstore. And I'm like, wow, you know, nobody else knew who I was, but I did. So, you know, but there are advantages and disadvantages. You know, if you go traditional publishing, your royalty rate is not as high. You know, but another thing to think about is Amazon is now publishing. They have the Kindle Scout program where they will, if your book is accepted, I think they'll give you like a $1,500 advance and help promote it and that sort of thing. So I also find it interesting that a lot of online booksellers are now opening retail locations.
Yes.
It's very, very interesting to me that Amazon is looking at opening bookstores. You know, and to me, that just tells me everything comes around again. I don't think we'll ever see the demise of books made from paper. I hope.
Who was that? Was it Stephen King who said that Kindle does to paperbacks what stairs do to the elevator, what elevator does to stairs, or something like that. So it's, you know, it's not really. I mean, I still know many people who prefer to read paperbacks, and that's what they will be reading for the time being. And so it's not like, you know, it's gonna be gone in the near future.
Well, no, I don't think. Well, it's like my daughter, my youngest daughter, who is 20. She's just a bookworm. And if she likes a book, she wants the hard copy book. She wants to hold it in her hand. Now she's got a Kindle that probably has 1,000 books on it, and that's a point I was going to make. You made a great point earlier about you know, even people, if they download your book for free, chances are they're probably not going to read it.
Yes,
and I think that's one of the things that and I'm the same way. I have a Kindle. I probably have 200 books on my Kindle that I have downloaded for free at any given time, and I probably haven't read any of them. So, you know, you can't build a brand unless people are reading your book. You know, I know so many authors and so many digital publishers who will look at their Amazon rankings and their KNP ratings and, you know, wow, I gave away 1,300 free books today. Well, that's great. I wonder how many of those books are actually going to be read.
Yeah.
You know, so there is that.
Okay.
I feel like I'm just dooming and glooming today.
No, not at all. It's you know, you share lots of practical stuff, but since I want to wrap this up, I just, you know, usually what I always say about this podcast is that Right to Be Read podcast inspires and encourages writers. So we sort of told about how hard it is and that they do need to make a hard work and spend time and write many books and be patient. So I want us to finish with something inspiring, inspiring and encouraging, so they don't think that it's really that bad.
Well, you know, here is what I would tell you. If you're a writer, okay, writers are not defined by the number of books they sell. They are defined by the number of books they write. So if you're a writer and you're very passionate about it, you have to write because it makes you happy. You know, I write because I just love writing, and there it is. So, if you end up selling books and making money and doing, being an author full time, well, good for you. You've made it. But the thing about it is you can't ever lose the passion. And that's something that if your mind is on the money prize, it's very easy to lose your passion. So, my ending thought is this: if you're a writer, write. Be happy that you have the ability to write, because that makes you happy. If you sell books, that's just, as we say in Alabama, that's just gravy on the biscuit.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, thank you for coming over. I think we had a really nice conversation, and you shared a lot. And I think sometimes it's always kind of, useful to look realistically at things. And I think what we spoke about here will save my listeners from unrealistic expectations, which will lead to eventual disappointments. So yes, by writing one book and putting it out there, you won't be rich and you won't be famous, most probably. But it doesn't mean that things are so bad. So just, get prepared, get the patience, which is very hard to get. Write those books, make sure they are good, and, do what we advise to do. And I guess eventually you will get there.
We hope so.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. Yeah, again, I don't want to be the doom and gloom guy, but I am the honesty guy. And again, it just goes back to what makes you happy and what you want to do. And if being an author makes you happy, again, write those books. Maybe someday someone will pick one up like they did Hugh Howey's, and the rest is history.
Exactly. Right to be read.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, guys, that's all I had for you today. I hope that you were not discouraged by this episode, but on the other hand, you sort of saw the real picture and now know what to expect. So we tried to save you from unrealistic expectations and the disappointment that would be coming because of that. As I already said, many things will be coming your way soon. If you aren't on my email list, please make sure that you get there and sign up on my website at www.anniealexander.com, because the emails are the main way I'm communicating with my listeners and sending out news. So make sure you don't miss anything there. And if you have a minute and want to do me a favor, please go and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and also leave a review for me. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. And I'll meet you in the next episode.